My name is Jenna Matzer, and I'm conducting this interview on behalf of Unity Hospice. Today is Thursday, October 1st, 2015, and we're here with Roland Josephson of South Elgin, Illinois, to record his military service experience for inclusion in the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. Can you please state your full name?
Roland C. Josephson.
Date of birth?
April 17, 1918.
Branch of service?
Army Air Corps.
Highest rank attained?
Technical Sergeant.
Did you serve during war conflicts?
I enlisted before the war started.
World War II?
World War II.
Okay. And what year did you enlist?
I enlisted September 20th, 1940.
Okay. And how many years did you serve?
I served till the end of the war. 5 years, 10 days.
Okay. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Elgin, Illinois. Sherman Hospital.
Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My mother and father were both born in Sweden, and they met over here and got married, and they both worked in the watch factory.
Do you have any siblings?
One sister. She was in the service. She was a nurse in the service. So she served 4 years in the service.
Wow, okay.
She just died last week.
I'm so sorry. So was it Navy or was it Army as well, or what are they?
She was in the Army.
The Army, okay. What were you doing before you entered the service?
The last place I worked, I was working at McGraw Electric when I enlisted.
And how long were you doing that before you enlisted?
I had been working there for 2 years.
Okay. So how were you 20 then when you enlisted, or how old were you when you enlisted?
22.
22. Okay. Why did you choose the Army Air Corps over any other military branch?
You could see war coming, and I figured if you enlisted, you could pick your service, and I thought the Air Corps would be the safest place to be.
Okay. What happened when you departed for training camp and during your early days of training?
We left Chicago on a train, and we went to Chanute Field, and that's in Illinois. And that's where the first place I was, at Chanute Field. And then I was at Chanute Field. I was supposed to go to clerical school because you went in, they gave you a choice of what you wanted to do. And I was going to go to clerical school, but they lost my records, and they didn't have my record for 17 days because they went to Jefferson Barracks. So that by day 17, the days delay, they never called me to come. Then one day they said they were looking for some teletype operator and maintenance men, and if you had a high enough classification score, you could go. So I went in that, and that was signed up for that. I went to teletype school and operator and maintenance for 2 months. After I graduated from that school, they sent me to Godman Field in Fort Knox, Kentucky. So I get to Fort Knox on a Tuesday, and they left on maneuvers on a Saturday. But in the meantime, they didn't have a teletype. And they says, well, they didn't know what to do. Well, they needed men because they were going on maneuvers, so they put them in the radio section. And we went on maneuvers down to Louisiana and Texas. And we were on maneuvers for a couple months. And at that time, I was operating the telephone. Well, then a couple guys in the I was going to, I don't know what it's called, a section, but it's a personnel section. Two fellows in the personnel section in the office left, and so I volunteered to go in there because I knew how to type, and so that's how I got started working in the office where I was all the time. And after the maneuvers, we were supposed to come back. Well, then they sent us to Carolina for another month of maneuvers. So we never got back to Godman Field December 1st, 1941. And we were making plans to get vacations for December, Christmas. And then war came up December 7th, so they canceled everything right there. And then from then on, we were on a war basis. But that's the first time they issued me a gun then.
So that was Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
What were you feeling after you heard of that news?
Huh?
How did you feel after you first heard that had happened?
Well, it was funny because we were sitting, four of us were playing cards, and then this was on a Sunday, and they announced Pearl Harbor, and it was a shock to us, and right away everything changed, and we didn't know what was going to happen then. But then after Pearl Harbor, we were at the airfield at Godman Field, the airfield in Fort Knox. Then in a couple months they shipped us down to Louisiana for training to go overseas. So we were in Louisiana for, 2 or 3 months, and then we shipped over to Europe from Louisiana. We went by train to Fort Dix, and we left the States on August 31st, 1942, and sailed for England on the Queen Elizabeth. It took us 6 days to get over there, and we landed in Gourock, Scotland. And after we landed in Scotland, they took us by train down in England. And that's where we were stationed the first year at an airfield called Membury, which was just outside a little town named Lambourne. And that was where we spent the first year. And my outfit was an observation squadron. And that's the original, it was original observation squadron from World War I. And here we were in World War II, 12th Observation Squadron. But then they changed our name while we were in England to Tactical Reconnaissance. So we were the 12th Tactical Reconnaissance. And our job originally is to do all the scouting work for the ground troops. So we were always attached on maneuvers to the Army because they flew the missions ahead, to spot enemy and see what was ahead. And so our pilots trained then, and of course, no tactical reconnaissance before the fighting. So they trained, our pilots trained in England with the British Air Force until they had the invasion. So then just before the invasion, we were transferred from, we were in the 8th Air Force, and so then we flew with a photo group to take all the pictures of the landing sites and V2 sites. And they had to have all those pictures before the invasion. So our pilots were flying all the missions right down to the beach to find out all these obstacle scores sticking in the water where the landing site was going to be. And so our pilots were busy before the invasion. After the invasion, they were moved to France, and some of our outfit was in France 2 weeks after D-Day. I actually got there a month after D-Day because I was in a cadre when before the invasion they took a few men out of each squadron and mixed them up, so if that squadron got lost they still had personnel to run it. And so I got over to Omaha Beach. In fact, when I went over to Omaha Beach, we were waiting for Southampton to go overseas the night before we went over. we had to sleep out in a tent and it started to rain. And here was a factory right there in Southampton, and the fellow says, well, come on, you fellas can sleep in there. They had the dining room, but there wasn't room in the dining room. I slept out on the floor with a helmet under my head, right next to a big machine. But then the next day, we were loaded on Liberty ships, and we sailed over to Omaha Beach. Here was an Air Corps outfit, and we had to climb down these rope ladders and get in ducks and walk up Omaha Beach. And the first night I spent out in an orchard, and next morning I woke up, here was the gal out milking cows just right a few yards from me.
Oh my goodness.
And then my outfit came and picked us up, you know, and then we were there until because now they were waiting for a breakthrough in the Army. Well, then they had that huge bombing when they bombed to break through at St. Lo. And I never seen so many planes in my life that day. 2,000 American planes and 1,000 British planes bombed night and day at St. Lo to level all that, because the Germans had us stop from moving. Well, then they bombed us whole, and that's when Patton took over the division. Well, our Air Corps outfit flew all the missions for Patton's division all the way across Europe. So the minute they got the breakthrough, Patton's division started moving down. And we moved a couple of weeks later, we moved down to Rennes, France. We were only there a couple of weeks, and he was moving so fast. Then we moved to Châteaudun, France, and we weren't there too long, and then they figured winter would spend up at Saint-Dizier. And we were at Saint-Dizier fixing our barracks up with wooden floors and sidings to spend the winter. Well, then they decided to send it closer to the front, so we moved up near Metz, in a small town. And we moved in this town, and it was snow on the ground, and we had to set our tents up in the middle of a field. Right in the middle of town was a football field. That's where we had our tent, and that's where we were supposed to stay. But luckily, they found out the Germans had a couple barracks that they had used for Polish prisoners. So they got a hold of these. It was a closed-in compound, but they got a hold of these two barracks, and they had bars on the windows, only one door for a two-story building, but we cut all the bars off, so we had a place to sleep. But our kitchen was outside under a tent, so here in the middle of December we were eating outside, or we did carry the food inside because it was too cold to sit out there all the time. And I can remember them little French kids on the outside the fences begging for food, you know. Well, they generally got the garbage that was left. They said they'd take it home for their chickens, but we knew they were eating it. They didn't have anything.
And that, what part of France was that?
It was near Metz.
Okay.
We was in a little town, Jarny-Coutances.
What was it relatively? Was it relatively poor, that area?
Oh,
or
yeah.
What was civilian
It was a poor
life?
mining town.
Okay.
In fact, the mines was right there. We went to the mines and took our showers.
So, outside of that, did you serve anywhere else? Or did you pretty much cover everything?
Oh, that covered everything.
Cover everything.
But while we were in England, you know, I was in England for 22 months. The first 14 months we were in one place, and the next year we moved 14 times. That meant pack up everything, your equipment, and work in the office, a typewriter, everything was in boxes. So you had to get up and move and set up tents over and over before the invasion to get you ready for the invasion, so you knew just what to do.
Mm-hmm. Jumping back to your early days of training, Do you recall any of your instructors?
Any what?
Any of your instructors?
No.
No?
In fact, the first 17 days, they couldn't do anything to me because they didn't have my record. So I wasn't even known to be in the service the first 17 days, but eat and sleep.
Really? Huh.
Yeah.
So once they did find your records, did you receive any specialized training?
Well, I went to a teletype school. That's the only training I had.
So what did you do? So you were, what was your job? What was the purpose of your position in the Army?
I took care of the service records.
Okay.
And worked in the office. You have to report every day how many people were there.
Okay.
And made out payrolls.
Okay.
And just all general office work.
Okay.
Because when you're in England, most of the fellows worked out on the line. It was the Air Corps, so they were working on the planes. But we did all the office work, but you weren't all in the same spot. In fact, when we lived in barracks in England, they were along a country road, and we had to go to the office where we had office, had to walk a half a mile up the road because everything was separated.
Okay. How did you adapt to military life, including food and social life?
Oh, I had a good life. In England, they gave us you get 1 day pass a week. So I went to town and go to movies and go to dances. And in fact, when I was in England, I had 3 furloughs. So I went to Scotland 3 times to see Scotland, and that was beautiful. So I got to go up to Elgin, Illinois, which Elgin here was named after. So I went up there and had to go through the Highland, and that was a beautiful trip. And I had a funny incident that one time I went up to that town, Elgin, got off at night, and I walked downtown to try and find a hotel. Well, there was something going on, and there was no hotels open. And then one fella says, oh, he says, there's a hotel right across the street from the railroad station you came in. So he helped me go out there and find it, and so I got a room there. And it was the cheap room, and I couldn't get over it because the next morning had breakfast with eggs, which we haven't had for so long time.
Yeah.
So it's quite an experience.
Did you witness any combat?
Huh?
Did you witness any combat during your military service?
No, but when we were in Normandy Beach, every night we had to get out of bed and go in we had dugouts because the minute they would shoot shrapnels from our 90 millimeters, that shrapnel came down and it'd kill you if it hit you. So, and in that beachhead, they called them, what was it, Charlie? Nighttime Charlie. The Germans would fly over every night, midnight and morning, so you couldn't get a good night's sleep. And the minute they'd fly over, they'd fire these guns, so you had to go undercover. And we had dugouts dug with poles and down under the dugouts every night. And then you knew there was shrapnel because on our runway was airstrips, and you could hear shrapnel hit it like rain.
What kind of friendships and camaraderie did you form while serving?
Well, I had a couple good buddies, but the one buddy from Nebraska, he got home. I carried a revolver home for him and mailed to him, and I never heard another word. And we were supposed to have a reunion, and he never showed up. I think he died. But then I had another buddy that was from Michigan, and I got out of service. I went to Michigan, visited him a couple times, and corresponded till he died.
How did you stay in touch with family and friends back home?
Well, the only way you could do is write. Nowadays they can talk, and that we couldn't. And I had a girlfriend that was waiting for me after I got out of war. And I told her if I ever got back home, we'd get married. So I wrote every day to her, and she wrote to me almost every day. But that's the only correspondence. So, and then when I got out of war, I did marry her 2 weeks after I got out.
Wow.
But I had quite an experience after the war. After the war, when they were sending everybody home with 120, 80 points or more, I had 126 points. So here I thought I'd go home right away. When they brought the list down for people to go home, I wasn't on it. And man, I called the headquarters and said, my name isn't on it. No, you got a critical spec number, so you got to stay. Well, I did the service records and all that, so I had to stay and prepare all the records for these fellows to go home, and I had to stay after the war until the war with Japan. Then I got to go home. But then because they kept us behind after the war, they gave, there was 8 of us, or 9, I don't remember, that had critical spec numbers and had to stay. They gave us a truck, and an officer took us down into Germany. And when the war ended, our outfit was just outside of Nuremberg, Firth Airfield. That's where we ended the war. And so then we got that bus, and when we were driving the bus, we stopped in Munich. And while we were in Munich, here was an officer standing here says, if you want to see Hitler's private train, it's over there and they're going to take it out of there today. So I got to go on Hitler's private train, see all the map rooms and everything where he lived. I don't know whatever happened to the train. I never heard any more, but at least I got on it. After that, then we went up to Berchtesgaden, Hitler's home, and I took my picture on Hitler's porch because the house was all bombed out. They bombed him all the time. But I got up to Hitler's home, and then from there we drove down to Innsbruck and drove up to Brenner Pass. We wanted to see if we get in Italy, but they wouldn't let us go into Italy. So then we drove down to Austria. So I really got to see a lot more after the war. But when the war ended with Japan, then I got sent home right away.
How did that make you feel?
Huh?
How did that make you feel? Were you excited to get home?
Boy, that was a great day. And one of the best feelings I ever had when we pulled into New York Harbor and see the Statue of Liberty. That was a great feeling.
So how did you get home to you were living in Elgin?
Yeah.
How did you get to Elgin from New York?
Well, of course we got out, went to Fort Dix, and then they sent us to Great Lakes. And then from Great Lakes we got discharged. I took the 3rd rail home, and I was going to surprise them all, but they read in the paper I was coming home. But I still remember walking home with my duffel bag and coming up to the house, and he had a dog, and he come barking, and I didn't say a word. I kept walking, and he sniffed me, and his tail started wagging and wagging. He hadn't seen the dog for 40 months, but boy, he knew it. It's amazing.
Okay, we are now resuming part 2 of our Veterans History Project interview with Roland Josephson. When you returned home from war, how were you received by your family and the community?
How did what?
How were you received by your family and the community?
Well, no different. I came home, of course, my parents were glad to see me, and I was only home 2 weeks, and I went on my honeymoon and got married. So, but I knew I had a job because while I was in the service, found out anyone you worked for September 16th, 1940. If you enlisted after that time, you were covered by a GI Bill of Rights. So I know the company had to give me a job. Well, they didn't give me a job I had, but I took a job. I didn't care for it, but while I was in the service, they had mailed out of them servicemen bonuses and money, and I hadn't got anything, and so I went and worked and got 2 weeks vacation and all them back benefits before. Then I took a job as a bookkeeper for an oil company.
Okay. And did you do that your whole life then? Did you retire doing that?
No, I did a lot of things. After I worked for the oil company, I had a chance to go up to Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, as a credit manager for a lithium company. Well, so I took the job, but my family had moved up. Well, that was after the war, and there's no housing, no places. You couldn't find any nice place to rent. So I only worked up there 3 months, and well, they wanted me to stay. They offered me to pay half the rent and that. But then after 1 year, I didn't know. So I came back to Elgin, and I went to work in the Elgin watch factory for 1 year. But then after I at the watch factory, a fellow I'd worked with at the oil company, he talked me into going in the grocery business. So him and I, we bought out a grocery on the corner of Hill and Franklin in Elgin, and we were in partnership 4 years, and business was good, but my partner said he didn't trust me. Well, we went into business. I was going to do the bookkeeping, and he was going to do the janitorial work. Well, every morning I'd sit and do the books, and he complained about that. He says, well, you can get out here and dust off the cans and do other things. I says, you can't get someone to do the books for what I'm doing it. I says, we can get kids to come in at that time $1 an hour they paid for it. I says, we can have kids come and do the work, but they aren't going to do these books for $1 an hour. So I give them an ultimatum that either sell out or I would buy them out. Well, it turned out that when the last minute, I had already had a store I had going to take over in case he wanted. He said he didn't want no part of the grocery business. So I had told him the figure I'd take or give, and so we made that. But I only had a 3-year lease and a 3-year option. Well, after my 6 years was up, he had made remarks that he was going to get rid of the Swede. and so he wanted to raise the rent. I offered to buy him, he wouldn't sell. So I bought another store, and I had to move all, but that was never the business we had in this small store, because we had right next door to the grocery store at one time was an A&P store, and there was a market. Years ago, meat markets and grocery stores were separate, but so there was a market right next door to this grocery store. We cut a hole in the wall and made it in one, and then we had a butcher that run the butcher, worked for us. So then we took over the butcher shop and had grocery. Well, that worked until, till I bought them out. Well, then I moved this other store up on Prospect Street in Elgin, but I was there 6 years, and it was never that busy as the other place, so it wasn't that good of a place. And then one day I had a chance my buddy asked me to get a job in the post office. And so he says, go take a test, and if you get high enough grade. Well, so I took the test and I got a high grade, so they hired me at the post office. Well, you go in the post office, you're just, you aren't a regular until they have an opening. So then I got in. Well, first day I started for them, they had made some more regulars, and then I was the next one to make regular in the clerk. So I was only in there 3 months, and I made regular. Well, then I sold out the store because I was working the post office and running the store too. But then I sold out the business and worked the post office. And then I worked in the post office 15 years, but then my service time counted for 5 years, so I got 20 years, and when I had 20 years, and I retired. But in the post office, I did almost every job you did in there, I did. In fact, I worked in the front, but most of the time I was when you mailed a lot of mail, bulk mailing. I was a bulk mailing clerk most of the time I was there, until there was an opening in the office, so then I went in the office as finance clerk, and I retired. Then I retired to California in 1982 and lived in California 27 years before I moved back here, because my daughter thought it'd be better to come back here when I needed help than being out there. But I was married, I got 2 weeks after I got out of service, I got married 50 years before my wife died.
Wow, congratulations.
So I had a long, happy life.
Good. Would you say that a lot of the skills you learned in the military, you applied to all of those jobs later in life?
Well, in the service course, I did office work, and that's what I did at the end too.
Yeah.
So most of my jobs were office jobs.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you would say that the military helped you with that? It helped you succeed in your professional future?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you a member of any veterans organizations?
Anyway.
Are you any veterans organizations?
Yeah, I belong to VFW.
How did your wartime experiences affect your life?
Well, after going through hardships and that, it was just nice to have different conditions. I always said I never cared to go camping, because in the service I did so much camping when we were in going across France and Germany. We were camping all the time, and I said it was a luxury when you traveled to go to a hotel or something and camp.
Yeah. What are some life lessons you learned from military?
Huh?
Are there any life lessons you learned from your military service?
Well, I don't know. I know I attended church every Sunday.
Okay. How has your military service impacted your feelings about war or the military in general?
Had a lot of respect for the military. Without it, would be dead.
What messages would you like to leave for future generations who will view or hear this interview?
Well, if I was a young fellow, I'd recommend going in the service. I think it's a good thing for all fellows to go into service. And I would recommend that and it's helped me since I got out, because anything's wrong, I can go to them. I get my hearing aids from them, and their help paying my rent. So I've got a lot of advantages from being in the service.
All right. Is there anything else you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
No. I don't know what else you'd be interested in, but I when I was in England, I often thought them English went through a rough war, And those countries over there, people here don't know what war is. Because when you live in a town and you're being bombed all the time, and you can't imagine in London you could go miles and not a thing standing. They just completely bombed out. And those people didn't hardly have anything to eat during the war. Their food was, I mean, you know, just, and then when, oh, that's another thing, when I was in Germany, they gave you a chance to get a 3-day pass to Paris. So then when I was in Germany, they drove me to Luxembourg, and I rode on one of them old passenger cars to Paris for 3 days. Clickety click, clickety click, clickety click. And so I got 3 days in Paris and got to see Paris too. So I got to see a lot of things while I was in service and travel.
Was there anything about Paris that sticks out in your memory?
No, at that time I stood in line to buy perfume to send home, I know. And Glenn Miller's band was there, so I got to see Glenn Miller's band when I was there in Paris. Got to the Folies Brigade.
Very nice. Anything else you want to add about your experience? Anything else that you want to add about your experience?
No, I guess that's about all. You know, of course, one of the saddest things we had, when we were on maneuvers in Texas, one of our airplanes crashed, and I was just eating supper, and the plane crashed just a few hundred yards away, and we all ran over there, and of course it caught fire, and the pilot got out, but there was 2 other men in there, a gunner and a navigator. They didn't get out, and we were throwing sand by hand trying to put the fire out. Before a fire came, they finally put it out. But then here they took out 2 charred bodies, and if you ever smelt dead bodies, that smell stays with you for weeks. And it was just horrible experience.
How'd that make you feel witnessing? How did that make you feel witnessing that?
Boy, it's tough. Yeah. And another day when we were in Kentucky, 4 of our pilots crashed and got killed too. So there's always seemed to be sadness around. And during the war we had a few shot down, but after they landed in France, some of them, they recovered because they had landed and the French hit them till the Americans got there. But we didn't lose that many pilots, but you always had some, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, on behalf of Unity Hospice, we just want to thank you so much for your service to our country, and especially for coming in and telling us your story.
Yeah. I think I'm just lucky I can remember a lot of those things that happened.
Yeah.